Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, Dr. Khalil, now we understand that the issue regarding the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has been really of huge concern to both Egypt and Sudan, but mainly Egypt as well, for quite some time. And this is the 11th meeting between the three countries. So before we actually talk about this final meeting and all the technical issues that needed to be ironed out, what are the main reasons for these talks being so hard? Which side is more stubborn? Are we stubborn regarding what we want? Is Ethiopia stubborn regarding what they believe their right is for the dam?
You know, I'm really amazed at the whole episode of this negotiations. What surprises me is that here we have the greatest river in the world. We have abundance of water. We have abundance of land. We have abundance of ideas that all can work for the development of the entire region, of the entire Nile basin. If we think and we work collectively, it can benefit everyone. It can benefit Egypt, can benefit Ethiopia, it can benefit Sudan. So the conflict, to me, is really not a conflict of development as much as it has been sort of a statement of wills. And it has taken different dimensions and different directions that unfortunately created a lot of bad feelings in various places. There is no shortage of ideas for development of the Nile basin and of the entire Nile Valley. And there are no shortage of ideas in terms of cultivating and creating a lot of food and abundance of food for everyone, both Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, if they cooperated and worked in unison to actually work towards development, not conflict. Unfortunately, what happened is that the Ethiopians started the development without consultation and without actual work and negotiations in order to think of the overall development strategy for the entire continent, actually. And the negotiation took wrong directions and wrong tracks for a long period of time. And it seems to me, and I'm hoping that with the declaration of the principles or intent and with the concepts of cooperation, we can all work together towards these developments. Obviously, the dam in its present structure and in present design creates a lot of damage to Egypt. And no one is paying attention to this. And instead of this, there could be a form of a new strategy towards development that both create the development for Ethiopia, the generation of the electricity. As a matter of fact, there are several plans that can generate multiple magnitudes of electricity in various smaller dams along the entire Nile Valley. That will have much more benefit in terms of water use, in terms of land use, in terms of agriculture, and in terms of wealth creation as well as infrastructure development for the entire region. So I'm hoping that the negotiations will come back to the right track. I understand they have engaged a new consultant today for the dam project, and hopefully they will come up with reasonable reports. But it seems to me that the negotiations need to take a different track than the ones that it is on right now.
Yes. Well, Mr. Sabrin, we've been all living in a good shape before the idea of the Renaissance Dam actually came to place. And after the 2011 revolution, Ethiopia showed up and they were like, okay, we're going to build the dam, and it's mainly for peaceful purposes to generate electricity and enough energy for the development of the country. But why did they decide that at this point in time? Why didn't they decide that years ago when there was an already established government before the 2011 revolution. There was a lot of turbulences and a lot of political instability in Egypt. So there wasn't really a strong, visible government dealing with such a critical issue. Why did Ethiopia choose to actually establish this dam and start in building it at that time?
You know, I think the Ethiopian put themselves in a very strange position. You know, they always tell you that, you know, you can't change geography. You don't choose how to, you know, to have one neighbor or another. You know, your neighbor, you are stuck with it, with him for a long time. So I think, you know, if we could characterize the whole issue is trust and mistrust. You know, and the way, as you put it very correctly, why the Ethiopian chose this time, you know, in Egypt to go ahead as if there is something hidden, there is something wrong. So they take advantage of the timing. So I think this is the whole things, you know, come from this very main point, which is how we could accommodate each other, especially trust. If there is no trust, we are going to keep, you know, having doubts, fears from one against the other. So I think the importance thing regarding the new way of handling, you know, this issue from Egyptian point of view is Egypt is actually committed to show once again that we do like to have a very normal, a very friendly relationship with Ethiopia. We are not against their prospects and development and everything, and we are willing. And as Dr. You know, Khalil said, you know, there is a lot of ideas. We would like to have Ethiopia strong, prosperous, because by the end of the day, it will be for the benefit of Ethiopia and also benefit for Egypt, Sudan, and the rest. So I think, you know, the important thing is not to miscalculate, you know, the Egyptian willing to cooperate. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength, because, you know, we do appreciate, you know, the history, you know, the civilization of the Ethiopian, you know, the long relationship, the connections, and we are willing, and our president is willing to wait until the Ethiopian realize that Egypt is very sincere and Egypt is partner, you know, trustful partner, you know. So, but they have to take into consideration that the whole issue is actually making a lot of nerves to the Egyptian public opinion. So the political leadership in Egypt is not in ease in handling this very hot potatoes issue. And there is a lot of pressure, a lot of fears, a lot of mistrust among, you know, some of the elites in Egypt, and also a big part of the public opinion. So they have to help Egyptian government to meet this mistrust, to answer your question by deeds, not by words.
Yes, well, Dr. Khalil, everyone had a feeling that the relationship between Egypt and Ethiopia it has been a strained relationship, especially after the assassination attempt on former President Hosni Mubarak's life that took place in Addis Ababa many years ago. Do you feel that since then the relationship has really been strained and really damaged, and it would take still a long time to actually regain the trust that Mr. Sabrin has been talking about?
As was mentioned here, obviously there is a great deal of mistrust that took place over the past few years. And it seems like the Ethiopians were driven into a path of conflict with Egypt to a great extent. Don't underestimate the influences of the outside forces into these things. And certainly taking advantage of the situation that existed in Egypt in 2011 and beyond to actually do this. It actually fuels the sense of mistrust on the Egyptian side too, not only on the Ethiopian side. And if people go back to their sanity, if you will, and think rationally, I think these things could be worked out to the benefit of everyone. That sense of mistrust, as you mentioned, the assassination attempt for President Mubarak was one of the things that took place and certainly created some feelings, hard feelings, maybe on the Egyptian side and maybe even on the other side with the reactions and so on. But those things need to be worked out. People have to realize that they have the same future, that they share the same resources, they live in close proximity, and they will continue to live in close proximity. They have done that for thousands of years, and it will continue to happen for thousands of years. And without cooperation, the conflict is not going to benefit anyone. So hoping that the Ethiopians just they tried to take advantage of a situation in a very short period of time, but that doesn't continue. I mean, history tells us that that doesn't continue. So hopefully the cooperation is what is going to bring people back to the negotiating tables to actually come up with the proper strategy for the development that will benefit everyone.
Yes. Well, Mr. Sabrin, 3 countries are participating in these talks: Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan. Well, obviously Egypt will be really badly affected by the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, but what about Sudan? Will they be as badly affected as Egypt will be affected? Do you see both Egypt and Sudan being on one side and Ethiopia on the other side? Where does Sudan exactly stand between the relationship between Egypt and Ethiopia? Are they on better terms with Ethiopia? Are they taking Egypt's side now? Are the relations between Ethiopia and Sudan as strained as the relationship between Egypt and Ethiopia?
I think, the Sudanese, they are, living very closely with Ethiopia. And you have to remember that Ethiopia was actually one of the countries who mingle in the Sudanese conflicts, which end up by the separation of Sudan, North Sudan and South Sudan. So by the end of the day, Ethiopia is an active player, and it's a very near neighbor to Sudan. And Sudan tried to, to work in a very difficult situation, try to, not to make the Ethiopian think that he is actually leaning towards the Egyptian position, and also try to, in the other hand, try not also that make the Egyptian afraid. But by the end of the day, he didn't manage to have, especially with Egypt. I think a lot of Egyptian, media people and also public opinion, they don't think that the Sudanese are actually taking, the right position. So Sudan is already under a lot of attacks, and its position is not quite clear. And people are attacking, the Sudanese position. But by the end of the day, you could say that both Sudan and Egypt is actually trying not to be reflected away from the main issue. The main issue is, let's have an expert opinion regarding this dam, and how it is going to affect, and which way will be the best way to keep, the right quotas for Egypt and Sudan, and not to be affected by, the building of this dam in a specific speed. So this is the main issue, and you could call it, this will be, the moment of truth, when, the international, expert house, run their course and declare what is, the opinion, which is, neutral opinion regarding this one. Given the fact that, the Egyptian position is very strong, this is, our quota is actually granted by, a historical agreement. So by the end of the day, Egyptian position is quite strong, but we are trying to accommodate, the Ethiopian wishes, and we are willing to go with them the whole, the whole way, until, to have a very neutral and international opinion regarding what is the consequences, what is the right answer. So I think Sudan and Egypt, when we are going to reach this moment of truth, it will be quite clear in which way all the partners are going to stand.
Yes. Well, talking about the experts' opinion now, the three countries agreed on picking two consultancy firms, the French consultancy firm BRL and the Dutch firm Deltaize in April. Later on, Deltaize actually withdrew from the consultancy in this issue because of a lack of objectivity and a lack of transparency researching this issue. And they later on, they replaced it with a French firm, Artelia. Now, first of all, why did the Dutch firm, actually Deltaize, say that they will not be able to conduct transparent and objective research regarding this matter if all three countries actually picked it as one of two companies?
You see, you're coming back to this, to the same issues that we are talking about. I see a lot of short-sightedness on the parts of some of the leaders, actually, in the countries, in Ethiopia and in Sudan and so on, in terms of, as you mentioned, taking advantage of a certain situation that is transient on a very short period of time, where actually the ties of land and river ties us forever. As was mentioned again, the fact that they insisting on certain activities that are fueled to a great extent by international pressures outside of the countries involved, as a matter of fact, which is creating situations that does not permit the transparent conducting of actual studies and research and actual reporting on facts or on objective measures. So no firm can actually work under these conditions. The political situation is so tensed that the political situation is trying to influence the actual engineering objectivity. And if that is the case, no firm can work under those conditions. So it makes quite sense to me that the firm would withdraw, because every firm would try to keep its reputation and its integrity in place. And unless people can feel that they are going to do the actual engineering study and report objectively and with fairness about the issues they will withdraw. So that took a long time. I am glad that there is another firm that thinks that they can handle the pressures that are placed upon them. You cannot come into a project when it's half complete, even with all the pressures that you are seeing in here, and come up with an objective reporting at the end. And what happens if they come up with an objective reporting? Are the parties committed actually to implementing it or not? And that was one of the important points in the negotiations, is are the people actually committed to following the recommendations of the consulting groups? People try to get away from even that one, which is totally unobjective, because if you go to the experts, you have to listen to the experts. You cannot go on political whims or on pressures from outside sources, which is unfortunately taking place.
Yes. So what if, because definitely the results of the two consultancy firms, the results will actually please one country and upset another, more or less to some extent. So after the results are out, whether they are objective or not, how committed do you feel the countries will be to these results? I mean, if the country that is upset from the results, how committed do you think they will be?
If they are going from the beginning and not willing to accept the results of the experts, then obviously we have a serious issue in here, which shows that they are doing it not for the benefit even of their own countries, not let alone of the other countries involved in the conflict.
Yes. Well, Mr. Sabrin, Egypt's suggestion actually regarding the Ethiopian dam is actually increasing the number of gates within the dam to guarantee more flow of water down the Nile River. Now, this seems like a logical option, and as both of you mentioned, there are other ways as well to actually generate electricity and generate a lot of energy for Ethiopia. So what seems to be the problem? I mean, if there are other alternatives that I'm sure Egypt and Sudan would be willing to help with, other than the Renaissance Dam, or actually at least just guaranteeing, increasing the number of gates to guarantee more water coming to Sudan and Egypt, what seems to be the problem with Ethiopia approving other alternatives and other solutions that would still guarantee their main purpose?
You know, this is precisely one of the main reasons why people are very suspicious of the way Ethiopia is handling everything. But they have to reconsider and to have into considerations that, you know, that Egypt do have a lot of cards. And one of important cards is, you know, that the international community and international institution, one of the main concern or elements which is actually very important, that, you know, it is not allowed that, you know, you build, you know, a project which will affect badly to the other, you know, countries, you know. So from this regard, you know, this is one of the main conflict, you know, that Egypt do like to have a very neutral and expert opinion, because Egypt do things that, you know, with all its expertise and all knowledge, Egypt is quite believes that its position 100% correct. That, you know, we are not in any way trying to block, you know, the development of Ethiopia. We are mainly what we are looking after is to you know, to stabilize, you know, the cooperation between Egypt and Ethiopia in a very good cooperation manner, and also to keep our historical rights and quotas, and to help Ethiopia and the rest of the Nile country to establish a new way of development, which is under the rule of win-win situation. not as the expenses of anybody. But if the Ethiopian side, by the end of the day, are going to refuse, the neutral expert opinion, this will open the door for a lot of things. But let us not to speak about it. Let's wait and see.
Yes. Well, one last question regarding this issue, Dr. Khalil. Assuming the worst case scenario, the results of the firms are actually out, the countries are still at a deadlock regarding finding an agreement about the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. What's the next step that will be taken by Egypt and Sudan?
Well, let's hope that we are not going to get to this point in here. I think if, as I mentioned, good minds get together to get out of this issue, I think we can do it. And I can think of so many different development plans that will have much more benefits both for Ethiopia, Sudan, and even for Egypt. But there are obviously the international community and the international pressures, and there are the international bodies that will probably become involved into this debate sometime, maybe in the future. There are so many open options available. This is not going to go away that easily. It's going to continue because it's the life of Egypt and it's the life of the entire people on the Nile Valley.
Yes.
So it's an issue that we have to approach it with a great deal of concern, but with a great deal of hope that the right thing would prevail.
Yes. And what if we actually reach an agreement? We understand the heritage and the quota of Egypt's quota of the Nile water has already been documented internationally for ages, and now it seems it's a jeopardy. So even if the three countries actually reach an agreement, what would guarantee that this agreement is not breached?
Well, you know this. That's what I was saying. Even Egypt quota can be increased, not decreased, if people follow the proper development plans or strategies. And Egypt quota is guaranteed by international treaties, as were mentioned, and Egypt will try to protect its rights for those. But I'm really hoping that good minds will prevail because, as I said, I'm not even looking for Egypt's quota to stay the same. I'm looking for Egypt's quota to increase, and there are ways to do so. So yes. I hope people would get to that level.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, these were the developments regarding Egypt's foreign relations with Ethiopia and Sudan and the Renaissance Dam ensuring Egypt's quota and share of the Nile water. But also locally, there were other developments. There were 11 new governors who were sworn in Egypt. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back to discuss it.
Eleven new regional governors took the constitutional oath this week before President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Prime Minister Sharif Ismail in a shake-up amid public discontent about inefficient services in some parts of the 27 governors' country. The two new governors have been appointed for the 11 governorates, namely Sharqiya, Minya, Giza, Kafr al-Sheikh, Suwais, Gharbiya, Bani Suef, Alexandria, Aswan, Port Said and Qalyubiyya. The remaining 15 governors, including the governors of Cairo, North Sinai and South Sinai, will stay in their positions. Minister of Local Development Ahmed Zaki Badr said the selection of the new governors has been based on ability to confront problems in the governorates, better utilizing resources of these governorates and achieving citizen satisfaction. Meanwhile, 5 deputy ministers have also been sworn in by President al-Sisi. The new deputy ministers are for the ministers of higher education, health and population, housing and communication. The governor's reshuffle is the third since al-Sisi came to office in June 2014. In the last governor reshuffle, which took place in February, 70 new governors were sworn in by President al-Sisi, most of whom were either academics or managers of industrial companies. Meanwhile, the head of state said that providing job opportunities will curb militancy, stressing that his administration intends to curb unemployment in North Sinai and across the country. During the announcement of cooperation between the Egypt-Sinai Industrial Development and Investment Company and the armed forces to detect and extract marble in Sinai, the president said whoever works would only think about his house and kids and would not consider adopting extremism. The president vowed not to leave an area without rushing to provide job opportunities in Sinai. Official statistics agency CAPMAS said in November that Egypt's unemployment rate fell to 12.8% in the 3 months ending 30th September from 13.1% in the same period a year earlier. Egypt is preparing for an international economic conference to attract foreign investments. The Investment Ministry and International Cooperation Ministry are planning to provide a platform for all Egyptian sectors to present investment opportunities at the conference.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Focusing now our discussion on the 11 new governors and the 5 new deputy ministers. Now, Mr. Sabrin, this is the third governor reshuffle during President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's time in office. Now, how do you read this reshuffle, the third in President Sisi's time, with 11 new governors for very, as well, important governorates with a lot of issues, a lot of problems, and a lot of responsibilities? How do you read this reshuffle? Is this something that we should be happy about, should be concerned about? Should we be concerned about what the previous governors actually did when they were in office?
I think, me personally, I read it that, our president is not shy to reshuffle. Mm-hmm. If, like a coach of a football team, if the coach is not getting the result, mm-hmm. He has to reshuffle, the makeup of the team. So I think the message is nobody is actually must feel comfortable in his seat. Mm-hmm. The only things is results. So why we don't speak about the guys who are actually still in their own seats? Mm-hmm. So the message to the public opinion, to the international community, also to the officials that you have to do your job in a very fast. This president actually is judging by result. These people at this specific time in the history of Egypt are very concerned about result. Mm-hmm. So the president is trying, pushing everything, and want everyone from the team, the official team, to work by his speed, by the same standard where the president is doing. Mm-hmm. So we have to wait and see if these guys are going to deliver. Mm-hmm. They are going to continue. If they are not going to deliver, I think we don't need. They have to look to see what is the formula mm-hmm. To success.
Yes. Well, Dr. Khalil, do you think that the governors that actually had to leave office and be replaced with new governors, do you feel that the task was a bit too much for them? Do you think that the governorates have way too many challenges and obstacles for the governors to actually overcome? What sort of mismanagement do you feel the previous governors actually went through?
Certainly the tasks are very diversified and very difficult to manage for any governor in any one of the governorates in here, because there are so many problems and there are so many opportunities too of different types. But if you notice, the same thing also applies. You didn't mention the 5 deputy ministers that were mentioned in here. Which brings the same issue that you just raised in here also for the ministries. So the deputy ministers that were appointed actually for the ministries that were combined and that were split in the last cabinet, and they were combined in the new cabinet. So the tasks are huge for any one person to actually carry, particularly that we still are very centralized in terms of decision making. It's only one person usually that makes the decision in any one place. So at the ministry level, it's the minister that makes the decision. At the governor's level, the governor is the one that makes the decision. And there is no one person that can handle all the tasks that way. And until we can find a good, systematic way to organize the governors as well as the ministries, by the way, we will never get the results that we are hoping for. You cannot centralize all the decisions in one person, particularly as we have the changes, the frequent changes that occur in personnel. The ministries right now, in terms of the number of changes that have taken place with no system in place, we don't have the institutions structure in place that will permit the continuity. And the unfortunate thing that every new one that comes in starts all over from the beginning rather than the continuity that exists. So I'm hoping that we work on the systematic structure of institutions, both governorates and ministries, so the governments and the ministries would work much better.
Yes. Well, Mr. Sabrin, this reshuffle was actually initiated by the presidency and the cabinet as well. But previously, we've seen actually the governor of Alexandria relieved of his duties. And partly, a big part of it was due to the public opinion that you've mentioned earlier on in tonight's episode. So do you feel that if the people of a certain governorate are not happy with the performance of their governor, do you feel that they can actually apply pressure and through their public opinion, they can actually relieve the governor from his position? And does that also, can that also be applied on the ministries level? If workers and people who are actually working underneath a certain ministry, can they actually apply or a certain pressure or have a say in the minister actually staying there or being relieved of his duties?
I think you have to distinguish between two things. You mentioned, the people. The people here are the customers. The people who are going to receive, the service or whatever this governor is going to have to deliver. When you speak about the ministry, I think speak about people who are working inside the ministry. This is something different. Compare with
definitely.
like the customer.
Yes.
By the end of the day, we are the Egyptian, the ordinary Egyptian, who are dealing with the result of education ministry. So if the result was so good, we will be happy. If the result of the service is not so good, we will never be happy. And I think one element of what happens the last 5 years is the public opinion is very strong, and our president is also taken into consideration, to please, Egyptian, ordinary Egyptian, and ask his officials to work to please, the Egyptian people. But, people who are working inside one institution or another, this is something different.
Well, not talking about people working within the institution, for instance, regarding the Ministry of Education, if people who are running schools, or the parents or the students who are running schools and universities, can they actually have a say in the minister's performance? In the tourism industry, people who are working as tour guide or having tourism companies, do they have a say in the performance of their minister?
Yeah, I think, the Minister of Tourism, he's in a position right now. He is doing, the situation is very difficult. We have a new campaign. So if the result is not favorable, I think he will be in a
well, I was just using them as an example.
Yeah, he will be. He's a good friend of mine, but he will be in a very difficult situation. Because you have to perform in a very difficult situation, not in a very normal or favorite situation. This will be, a difference between a very clever one or a very ordinary, guy.
Yes. Well, Dr. Khalil, talking about choosing the governors, on what basis, on what sort of background should the presidency or the government choose the governor? Because obviously, on the basis or the background, the criteria that we've chosen, the previous governors didn't really work out so well. So, do you change the criteria? Do you try to adopt the background or the criteria for choosing a new governor?
Well, you have to have very solid and serious criteria for selection of people. What we have seen in the past number of years, unfortunately, we have never understood on what basis a governor or even a minister was selected, and even on what basis they left. We found people coming and people leaving every few months on those levels without understanding quite what the criteria of selection is. Obviously, if you look at the recent group of governors, the criteria seem to be, from what we're seeing in here, of security, obviously, which is obvious in terms of the number of people that work in security. Maybe importance of execution, that they would execute things more forcefully and maybe promptly. But other than that, I don't know exactly what the criteria. I don't know the people that came in. I know the ones that came into the ministries as deputy ministers, and they're very good people, actually. But again, what's the mandate? Even when they came in with the title of deputy minister, for example, of higher education, where in fact the task, to my understanding, is going to be the Ministry of Scientific Research. So it didn't even specify that into the task. The same thing happened in the vocational ministry and so on. So I think there need to be more transparency, more clarity in the criteria for selection and in the tasks assigned to each one. And we understand the mandate under which they came, so we can actually also have a follow-up on their performance as they leave and understand why they left or why they stayed in their place.
Yes, definitely. Mr. Sabrin, now 5 new deputy ministers, and there was a new cabinet that was sworn in months ago, the second one during President Sisi's term. Now, the new parliament should be convening very soon their first session, and one of the tasks that they will be asked to perform was actually deciding on whether to keep the government and the cabinet as is or actually changing it. Now, with all these reshuffles taking place and all the new deputy ministers coming into the equation very late on in the game now, do you feel that the new parliament should actually wait and see the performance of the new deputy ministers and see how the new cabinet in general that was sworn in months ago is performing? Do you feel that they should actually just ask for the whole cabinet's resignation and start off on a new page with the new parliament? How do you see this being played out by the parliament?
Actually, the government is going to submit to Parliament a program taking into consideration, what the President asked them, priorities. And the priorities of the President are very clear, which is, reducing, unemployment, reducing the prices, inflation, and also, having more and more prosper. And I think the president put a very high number of the growth rate. So the government are going to submit in a very detail the program to Parliament. So if Parliament, member of Parliament find it very reasonable, and the way the government is actually going to achieve these priorities, in terms also, I forget also one important thing, which is a very clear things, the whole things we spoke about it, is improving the service to the common people regarding education, health, and you name it, all these services. This is a very important priorities, and a very important element how the people and how the president is going to judge the success or failure of the government. So the member of parliament are going to discuss it, and if I remember correctly, the current prime minister, he said that he's going to parliament and stay for several days negotiating and discussing the program in very details of his government, how to take Egypt forward and how to fulfill the instruction of the president. So in this regard, we have to wait and see the plans of the Egyptian government, which is going to introduce to parliament, and how the parliament actually is going to react, going to accept it, going to ask more details, more explanation, or liking one of minister or dislike one of plans of a minister. So we have to wait and see. And after the parliament approving the government plan and government program, I think the public opinion, the media, the president and parliament, all these stakeholders are actually going to follow the government and the ministers in every step, and it is not going to be open check. They are going to have asking them to achieve a specific things in a specific timing. So this is a new thing.
Yes, definitely. Dr. Khalil, talking about the deputy ministers, 5 new deputy ministers for the ministries of higher education, education, health and population, housing and communication. And they're all ministries that really work on the very critical, fundamental infrastructure parts of the Egyptian society. We've always been talking about the problems with education and health, and we've been focusing lately on the ministries regarding the finances and the economic ones to boost Egypt's economy. Now, do you feel that the government realizes now that this area needs a whole lot of new boosting, the health, the education, the higher education and the housing?
Well, all of them do, obviously.
Because we're running out of time, so I have to make that quick.
Sure, but I guess, as I mentioned, probably the deputy ministers, if you notice the Ministry of Higher Education, I mean, that was a Ministry of Higher Education and the State Ministry of Scientific Research. They were split in the previous cabinet, and now they were combined. So as they were combined, the minister now needs some sort of additional support for the Ministry of Scientific Research. So that's probably going to be the task of the new deputy minister. The same thing will happen in the Ministry of Education with the vocational education. The same thing is going to happen in the population, the housing and population. So those are understandable, but they were not designated as such, maybe, in the announcement itself. I think that all the other ministers need the sort of the permanent first undersecretary maybe that's permanent. As the ministers change, at least the institution would continue to function.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of developments in Egypt locally and internationally, but unfortunately that's all the time we have to discuss them here on the Daily Debate. And before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Dr. Tarik Khalil, the president of the Nile University. I'd also like to thank Mr. Mohamed Sabrin, the journalist and writer at Al Ahram newspaper. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, our pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.